You live surrounded by numbers, bills, deadlines, collection messages, and looks that try to remind you that you owe, that you are late, that you are trapped. And because the world repeats this, you have begun to believe it is true. But the world only repeats what you first accepted within yourself. Everything that appears outwardly is just the shell. The seed is always in the invisible, and as long as you continue to perceive yourself as someone struggling to get out, you will continue to create situations that demand struggle. As long as you perceive yourself as someone who owes, you will remain surrounded by debts. Not because they have power, but because you are identified with the state that sustains them. Most people live as if they were victims of fixed circumstances, as if life were a set of immutable facts that need to be carried on their backs. But this is just collective hypnosis, a shared illusion. Nothing around you is as solid as it seems. Nothing has real authority. Everything you call reality is merely the delayed reflection of what you have already settled within your innermost being. This is why changing the external appearance never works. You are trying to change the mirror, but keeping the face, the mirror reflects. In 1936, that man was no different from you. He looked at the papers, at the negative balances, at the overdue notices, and believed that it was a divine sentence etched in stone. He thought the world was telling him, "It's impossible to get out of this." But it wasn't the world. It was the reflection of his own inner conviction. And when he walked through my door, he walked in carrying not debts, but identity. The identity of the debtor. And as long as that identity was alive within him, no negotiation, no effort, no strategy would free him. I looked at him and saw that what needed to be transformed was not his situation, but the internal place from which he observed the situation. He believed he needed to conquer freedom. I showed him that he needed to assume it. And at that moment, even before any words were spoken, one thing became clear. No one leaves a state by force. One leaves by substitution. The old state must die for the new to live. There is no negotiation between light and shadow. One exists only as long as the other is not assumed. Therefore, the word I gave him was not a command to the external world. It was an internal confirmation, an anchor, a door locked behind the old man. The word paid off, spoken as an internal fact, not as a wish, cut the roots of the debtor's identity that he had carried for years. Because when you change your identity, everything around loses the obligation to remain as it was. And the world, which has always been a servant, simply obeys. This is what you need to understand now. You are not dealing with debts, numbers, or circumstances. You are dealing with states, and states are chosen. They are inhabited. They are assumed. Just as you can change your clothes, you can change your state. And the world, like a mirror, will change with you. You don't conquer the external. You replace the internal, and the external loses meaning. That's where everything begins. That's where everything changes. That's where the impossible bends. When you pray for something, you are silently affirming that you don't have it. And what you affirm, even without realizing it, becomes the state you inhabit. This is why so many spend years pleading for changes without ever touching them. Because they continue praying from emptiness, from lack, from waiting. What I taught the man in 1936, and what I need you to understand now, is that true prayer is not a request. It is an acceptance. It is an internal repositioning. You don't address an external power to make something happen. You awaken the inner power by assuming it has already happened. Prayer, in this sense, is not a bridge to reach the desired end. It is the end itself, clothed in consciousness. When he pronounced the word paid off, he didn't try to convince God, the world, or himself. He simply settled into the state of one who is already free. He spoke the word not as one who creates, but as one who recognizes. And that is what transforms everything. Most people think that feeling hope, enthusiasm, or strong desire is enough. But desire doesn't create. It only points to what you are not yet. True creation happens when you abandon desire and assume fulfillment. The human mind is conditioned to look for signs, expect improvements, wait for the external world to show evidence before allowing itself to feel that something has changed. But this is living backwards. It is living as someone subservient to the mirror, instead of someone who determines the reflection. The state you assume with silent conviction is more powerful than any amount of debt, any size of obstacle, any delay the world presents. The state is the cause. Appearance is just the delayed effect, and effects cannot resist when the cause changes. This is why, when teaching about true prayer, I insisted that he do nothing to get rid of the debts. Don't try to pay them off, I said. Just be paid off. Because any movement made from the state of someone who owes only reinforces that very state. You can work tirelessly, make agreements, renegotiate values, cut expenses. But if internally you continue to be someone trying to get out of debt, you will never get out. True prayer is the breaking of that logic. It is the act of aligning with the end and allowing the world to reorganize itself according to this new inner position. When he began to repeat the word paid off, he didn't do it as a mantra. The repetition wasn't what mattered. It was the recognition. Each time he said it, he breathed like a free person. He looked around like a free person. He walked like a free person. He didn't wait for the statement to change to feel different. He felt different, and the statement changed because it had no other choice. This is the law. The state you assume with profound sincerity must manifest. It cannot be avoided. It cannot be delayed. True prayer is assuming the end as present, not as a promise. It is inhabiting what you want to live as if it were already yours, because it already is. You just hadn't recognized it yet. But now you do. And when you recognize it, change has no alternative. It obeys. Life never gives you what you wish for. It gives you what you are. And this is what most people never realize. When you look at a bill, a negative balance, or a circumstance that seems to limit you, you are not seeing the truth about yourself. You are seeing only the reflection of the state you have sustained for too long. Nothing outside of you is trying to punish you, block you, or test you. The external world is not a judge, it is a mirror. It simply returns with absolute obedience what you have accepted yourself to be within. And as long as you continue to perceive yourself as someone in search of relief, you will continue to receive reasons to seek relief. As long as you perceive yourself as someone who needs to solve problems, you will continue to attract situations that demand solutions. The mirror has no will of its own. It merely reflects the face you present before it. The man in 1936 lived exactly like this, reacting to the reflection and believing that the reflection was the cause. He saw debts and concluded he was a debtor. He saw delays and concluded he was trapped. Each new bill seemed to confirm an identity he didn't dare question. But when I showed him that all of it was merely projection, something changed. He finally understood that he didn't need to chase new circumstances. He only needed to abandon the state of being an indebted man that he carried within himself. When you try to change life through appearance, you become its slave. When you change life through state, appearance loses the power to control you. The truth is that nothing in the world outside of you can tell you who you are. You can look at numbers, documents, statements, opinions, and circumstances. But none of this has the authority to define your identity. Life shows you the state you have accepted, but never the state you are obligated to maintain. If you self-declare free, life will have to reflect freedom. If you self-declare capable, life will have to open paths. But if you self-declare trapped, debtor, late, life will continue to reflect that image. Not because it is true, but because you sustain it. Everything outside is effect. The only point of cause is your inner being. That's where everything begins. When he began to assume the state of being paid off, even before any proof, the external world began to waver. Situations that seemed solid began to unravel. Doors that seemed closed began to open. Not because destiny changed, but because the mirror was forced to change. Life does not create on its own. It merely replicates. The reflection is never stronger than the face. The debt is never stronger than the state of who you are. And who you are, you decide now. When you understand this, you stop reacting to what you see and begin to govern what you will see. This is how life responds. This is how it has always responded. This is how it will respond to you when you finally assume your true position. The past only stays alive because you insist on carrying it as if it were part of who you are. But the past has no existence of its own. It is sustained only by your memory, by your unconscious loyalty to the old state. This is why so many live repeating the same cycles, not because they are condemned to them, but because they continue to be the same person internally, even when they desire a different life. There is nothing more imprisoning than keeping alive the identity that sustains the problem. And it is precisely here that the third principle reveals itself with force. Abandoning the old man is not forgetting events. It is letting go of the character you have been playing. This character has habits, memories, beliefs, fears, and an emotional stance that keeps him trapped in certain experiences. As long as he exists within you, the world will continue to recognize and respond to him, like a shopkeeper who insists on calling you by the same name because you haven't yet introduced yourself differently. The man in 1936 carried the character of the debtor like a second skin. He didn't just have debts. He was the debtor. He lived as such, thought as such, reacted as such. With each collection notice, his identity was reinforced. He believed he was fighting against external circumstances, but in reality, he was fighting against the role he insisted on playing. When I told him to abandon the old man, he believed I was talking about abandoning fear, worry, or the numbers. But that wasn't it. I was talking about abandoning who he was being while observing all of that, because who he was internally sustained, fed, and perpetuated every external situation he tried to resolve. When you abandon the old man, you don't make an effort to change habits. You change the root that produces the habits. You don't try to control thoughts. You change the thinker. You don't try to manipulate emotions. You become someone for whom other emotions are natural. It's like leaving an old house. You don't need to destroy every piece of furniture before leaving. Just close the door and inhabit another. But human beings insist on renovating the old state instead of simply letting it die. And as long as it stays alive, even if renewed on the surface, the external world continues to respond to the same emotional tenant. The man in 1936 only saw his life change when he understood this. He realized that it was no use acting like a debtor trying to solve debts. He needed to become a paid-off man before any proof said so. He needed to feel freedom before living it. He needed to breathe like someone who owed nothing. When he assumed this new character, silent, secure, finalized, the old one simply lost space. His beliefs began to crumble. His fears began to weaken. And his reality began to reflect this internal change. He didn't fight against the old state. He simply replaced it. And everything that was tied to the old automatically dissolved, like a dry branch that falls when the tree blossoms. Abandoning the old man is the point where transformation stops being theory and becomes inevitable. Because when you let die who sustained the old life, there is nothing left to keep it standing. The reality that seemed so solid loses its foundation, and it is here that the new becomes possible, not because the world changed, but because the being to whom the world responds finally changed. Action born of desperation is always confused, heavy, anxious. It is the attempt of a state of lack trying to force the world to give it what it hasn't yet assumed to be. This is why so many work tirelessly, make plans, try to control all variables, and, even so, continue to go in circles. They believe that action creates change, when the truth is exactly the opposite. True action is a consequence of change, not a cause. You don't move to build a state. You move because you are already in it. This is the fourth principle, and it dismantles the entire logic of human effort based on fear. The man in 1936 lived exhausted. He worked twice as hard, tried to renegotiate debts, sought practical solutions, but each action reinforced the same state, that of someone who desperately needed to solve something. And as long as that state was the foundation, no action would have real power. He believed that if he acted enough, he would finally feel free. But this is a misconception. No one feels free after the situation changes. The situation changes after the person decides to be free. Freedom is the state that precedes the path, not the other way around. And so I told him, don't try to get out of debt. Feel paid off. When he accepted this, the impulse to chase after things disappeared. The anxiety ceased. Desperation lost its meaning. And for the first time, he began to act not as someone fleeing, but as someone who has already arrived. Inspired action is a silent force. It is not born of fear of what might happen, but from the certainty of what already is. It is a natural impulse, almost inevitable, that effortlessly leads you to steps that make sense. It's not hyperactivity, it's precision. It's not rushing, it's moving at the exact moment that corresponds to your new state. Actions that once seemed impossible begin to seem obvious. Paths that once didn't exist begin to reveal themselves. Opportunities that once seemed improbable begin to arise. Not because you tried harder, but because you changed the state that governs your perception. When he assumed the state of being paid off, something curious happened. He began to receive ideas he would never have considered before. He met people he wouldn't have met in another state. He perceived possibilities that had always been around him, but which the old state didn't allow him to see. He didn't force anything. He just followed what presented itself, not to achieve freedom, but because he was already free. Action born of the end is firm, simple, direct. It has no anxiety, no weight, no urgency. It is a clean action. It doesn't try to prove anything, nor compensate for anything. It merely expresses the state already assumed. This is the secret that so many ignore. You act according to what you are, not according to what you want to be. This is why changing the state changes life, because it changes everything you perceive, interpret, and execute. That man did not resolve his debts through effort. He resolved them because he began to act as someone who had no debts. Correct action can only be born from the correct being. And when you finally assume the finalized state, the right actions emerge effortlessly at the exact time, revealing a path that has always been available, just hidden by the old state. A word only becomes powerful when it comes from the correct state. Repeated out of fear, it is weak. Pronounced with doubt, it is empty. Spoken as an attempt, it is useless. But when it comes from a completed state, it becomes a decree. And a decree does not ask, does not negotiate, does not wait. It establishes. This is the fifth principle, and perhaps the most misunderstood of all. It is not the sound of the word that creates, it is its origin. The word paid off did not change that man's life because it was special. It changed because he pronounced it as someone who already was what he was saying. He didn't use the word to try to attract freedom. He used the word to confirm the freedom he had already accepted as true. The word, in this case, was not the beginning. It was the seal of the end. When you speak from lack, your words contradict your state and become mere noise. When you speak from desire, your words reveal that you haven't yet appropriated what you want. But when you speak as one who states a fact, the entire universe recognizes that vibration as law. That's how it happened in 1936. The man didn't repeat the word hoping something would happen. He used it to align every thought, every gesture, every emotion to the state of someone who no longer owed anything. It wasn't a mantra, it was identity. It wasn't a technique, it was position. He pronounced paid off, with the silent certainty of one who merely describes an inner reality. And when the inner reality is firm, the outer loses the possibility of disagreeing. The word is like the last brick placed in a structure you have already completed within yourself. It is the confirmation, not the effort. Therefore, even though he repeated it only a few times, the impact was profound because each repetition was coherent. He didn't slide back into the old state when looking at circumstances. He remained firm in the new, and the word merely served to consolidate that firmness. His consciousness had changed, and the word merely sealed that change. This is why the world sprang into motion immediately. Debts that seemed impossible to resolve were paid off through unexpected means. People appeared, doors opened, situations reorganized themselves like pieces finally finding their place. None of this was coincidence. It was obedience. The word spoken in the right state forces the world to align. This is what you need to understand. The word is not magic. It is a reflection. It is an expression. It is the external sound of an internal certainty. This is why any word can serve as long as it comes from the assumed end. You can say, resolved, completed, done, paid off. But if you say it from lack, nothing changes. If you say it from the end, nothing remains. The word only has power